Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like-minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but 2 of my last 3 trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Amateur Traveler Podcast, Episode 48.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Today in the show, Southern California, especially San Diego. This episode is brought to you by HotelBook.com. For your next trip to Southern California, visit HotelBook.com for rates of up to 30% off. I have 2 news stories for you today. The first one, if you haven't made your summer plans yet, Concierge.com has an article about the world's sexiest beaches. So if you want to go lie in the sun and you're not sure where, check out that article in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. The second article, which is a bit of self-promotion here, is for the Podcaster Awards. The Podcaster's People Choice Awards has just opened up for nominations, so if you happen to be fond of the Amateur Traveler or some other podcast, preferably some other non-travel podcast, follow the links in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com and go nominate your favorite podcasts at the podcasterawards.com site. Welcome back to the Amateur Traveler Podcast. If you're wondering what happened last week when I didn't get a show out after 45 weeks in a row of no breaks, I spent that week on a bus with 40 high school students, including my 2 children, on a church youth group choir tour in Southern California. We went to Northridge and Ventura, Hollywood and San Diego, Temecula, Fresno, Castro Valley, and then home. I won't cover everything that we did in that trip, but that has inspired me to talk about San Diego today, so we'll get into that a little more later. Before we get into San Diego, some of the other places I've mentioned that I won't be going into detail with, I just want to give you a few details. Fresno, California, which is in the Central Valley, was 115. Don't go. Hollywood, California, we'll talk about some other time. I'm hoping to get down to Hollywood later on. Hollywood, though, is a pretty sleazy kind of place. Needs a little urban renewal. But I'll tell you a little more about that probably in the fall. I'm expecting to get back down to Southern California and do something more about that particular region. Ventura is a place where I happened to get caught in a riptide while swimming at the beach there. It is a lovely beach other than that. And I'll tell you a little more about riptides as we talk about San Diego. Temecula is an interesting region. It's near San Diego, and it's turning into a wine region. And a pretty area. That's where you should retire. And we also went to Disneyland, and I did take my portable recorder with me. I haven't listened to the sounds that I recorded yet, but I'm hoping to use those later on in the program. Later on some other program. So San Diego. One of the places we stopped is San Diego, and San Diego holds a warm spot in my heart. The last trip that my wife and I did before we had kids was scheduled to be to Hawaii. And we looked at our finances and decided Hawaii was lovely, but we couldn't afford it. And so instead we went to San Diego. And San Diego is actually one other region in the U.S. that I could consider moving because my wife would actually move with me. She has some requirements, you understand. She needs to be near enough to a beach that she can get there at least a couple times a year. So that San Jose is one of the places that meets that requirement. We'll go over to Santa Cruz. And then she also has to be near a National League team. So that leaves a very small number of places, San Diego being one of them that meets that acceptable criteria. Obviously, New York has the New York Mets and is near beaches, so that's a possibility. She'd like to own an apartment in New York City in Manhattan when we're rich and famous and go there about 1 month a year. And some of you would point out that there's also Florida and the Florida Marlins, but no longer being a resident of New York, Joan is no longer required by law to retire to Florida, so I think we can rule that out. Now, I mentioned in the show on San Francisco that when many people come to California, they're expecting beach culture, they're expecting surfers, they're expecting warm weather and warm beaches, and they're always a little bit surprised. A lot of sweatshirts are sold in San Francisco to tourists who don't realize that California has a variety of cultures, a variety of locations, and most of all, a variety of weather. But San Diego is really what they're picturing. San Diego and Southern California, from Long Beach, Manhattan Beach, all the way down to San Diego, you'll find the beach culture that you're expecting. And so the first thing I would suggest in San Diego that you're going to do is you're going to get to the beach. And the two beaches that I would suggest, one is Mission Bay. And Mission Bay is an interesting beach if you're looking for renting a boat and getting out on the water. There's a number of different boat rental places near Mission Bay, and it is a complex series of inlets, predominantly man-made, where you can find real small beaches, very shallow, and you can rent some boats and jet skis and such and go out on the water. And so if that's what you're looking for, Mission Bay is where you want to go. But my favorite beach community in San Diego area is Pacific Beach. Pacific Beach is obviously a beach, but as well as that, there's a small downtown shopping area where you can get your new surfboard, you can buy your surfing equipment, you can go to the local cafe and get the surfer special for breakfast. There are a lot of little shops for people who don't want to spend all their time on the beach. There are number of restaurants there. And there's a wonderful boardwalk that goes up and down the length of the beach. There's also a pier that goes out at Pacific Beach, and on the beach is a hotel. So if you're looking for a convenient place to stay near the beach at Pacific Beach, I could recommend the Crystal Pier Hotel, which goes out over the beach. The beach is also shallow beach, in general good for kids, or at least I would say so, because it goes out fairly gradually. Although we did run into our second experience on the trip that I was on with riptides at Pacific Beach. 3 of the kids were out in the water, and they went out rather far. And they went out far enough that the shortest of the 3 kids couldn't touch anymore, and suddenly the other 2 looked around and he wasn't there. He had been grabbed by the riptide and taken out towards sea. Fortunately, one of the 2 people he was with was a water polo player and a good swimmer who went out and got him and calmed him down and got him on his back and got him about halfway back before the lifeguards came out to meet him, which was a good thing because as you swim against a riptide, it can be very wearing. And I don't know if you know the trick with a riptide, but if you get caught in a riptide, which is a tide which is taking you out, you're supposed to swim parallel to the beach to get out of the riptide before you can go in, because otherwise you're basically going to be swimming against this strong current. And apparently that beach does have its share of riptides. It does have good lifeguards who we watched pull people out periodically, but if you stay in closer where you can touch the bottom, it seems to be a fairly good swimming beach. In fact, it's relatively shallow and would work better for kids. There was a fair amount of seaweed there on the day we were there, but the water was warm, and it was a nice experience, a fairly calm place to learn to body surf, I would say, as long as you just don't go out too far and stay where you can touch the bottom. But let's assume you can only spend so much of your time people watching or sightseeing out at the beach. You can only get so much sun before you'll burn. So what else is there to do in San Diego? Well, let's start with the major attractions. When Southwest first went to San Diego, you may remember that their planes were painted like Shamu. Shamu the whale at SeaWorld. SeaWorld is near Mission Bay in San Diego and is probably one of the best known of the attractions at San Diego. And certainly worth the time if you go there for the dolphin shows, the whale shows, and the various other things that are at SeaWorld. Good day for the family, and I would certainly recommend it for kids of all ages, all on up to adults. Also, the world-famous San Diego Zoo is, of course, still in San Diego, and one of the finest zoos that I have been to. But I would actually recommend, if you're going to be in San Diego, first of all, to get around San Diego, I'd recommend getting a car. It's not going to be easy to get around to on public transportation. It's more of a place that you're going to need a car. And if you have a car, you might want to head about 35 miles north of San Diego to the Wild Animal Park, which is associated with the San Diego Zoo. And the Wild Animal Park is one of the best places in the U.S., if you're not going to get to Africa this summer, to go see African animals out in an artificial savanna. So you get to see the giraffes and the zebras and such out in herds and mixed in and amongst each other, and not just segmented one animal at a time in a smaller pen like you'd see in a zoo. So a very worthwhile experience. You go out there in vehicles and drive in and amongst the animals. And certainly something I would recommend for at least plan on spending half a day there. And you might want to plan on having your trip overlap twilight, because the predators like the lions are nocturnal and you won't see much of them in the daytime. What you'd see would be the herd animals. A popular park near San Diego, which is a newer park and certainly something you've heard more of probably if you have kids who are, I would say, 10 years old or younger, would be Legoland. And Legoland is a very popular park, especially for families with younger children. And we have a number of friends who go there and go back there and truly enjoy it. The one comment I would say, though, is in general, the people I know who've gone to the park recommend it for younger kids and not so much for teenagers or older kids or even adults without children. It is an expensive park like all the rest of these and a little tied to a younger age range. But certainly for that crowd, especially the Lego crowd, and I just left my wife downstairs putting together my son's Legos to sell them on eBay, so I'm not exactly sure what the age of Legos is, but certainly for that crowd, Legoland is very popular. So once you've done the parks and you've done the beaches, what else is there to do in San Diego? There's a number of different things that you've probably heard of. First of all, the world-famous Coronado Hotel out on the island, the other side of the bridge from San Diego, has been there for many years. It was the scene for Marilyn Monroe's Some Like It Hot movie. And a trip to the Coronado might be something you do if you have a little more time. I wouldn't recommend it for people who are particularly tight for time. And then there are a number of different little neighborhoods in San Diego, and I'll start with my least favorite and I'll go to my most favorite. So Seaport Village is near downtown San Diego, and it's a lovely little shopping area, and you can certainly find pretty good seafood while you're there. But to me, it's something that I would do only if I had time. It wouldn't be on my list of top places to go in San Diego. It's just a little more of a manufactured neighborhood. One step up, I think, from Seaport Village, and not too far away, also near downtown San Diego, would be Gaslamp, the Gaslamp district in San Diego. And that's a good place if you're looking for good nightlife in the city. Lots of different restaurants, bars, and music venues there, and some place that's good to go to hang out in the evening. And so Gaslamp I would put a little higher on my list of places that I'd want to go see. Higher than that still would be a little-known gem near San Diego, and it's only about 2 or 3 blocks long. It's right near the airport. People drive right past it on the way to downtown without seeing it, and that is Little Italy. And Little Italy is a very small area, as I said, in downtown San Diego, not too far from the airport. The time you want to go see Little Italy is in October for the Columbus Day celebration. Probably on other celebrations as well, but having explored Little Italy on the Columbus Day celebration, it is filled with bands, it is filled with good foods, and it's filled with street artists who are drawing chalk drawings on the street right out in front of these various restaurants and such that are works of art. And they're works of art in an amazing way, in the sense that people are putting so much work and so much detail into these beautiful drawings that are just going to wash away at the end of the day. So if you haven't been to a street festival like this and seen artists really doing something with the chalk drawings on the street, they're just amazing. And I'll put in some pictures in the iTunes enhanced version for those of you who have that show this drawings. Otherwise, you might want to Google it on the internet for those of you who are listening to the MP3 version of the show. So Little Italy, wonderful place to go, even if you're just going for a dinner. And my favorite place to eat in Little Italy is Filippi's. And Filippi's is a family-style Italian restaurant, inexpensive, good food, more for your gourmand than your gourmet. You walk in through a little Italian grocery. Basically, you can pick up Italian products there, and you walk back to the back, whether you order pasta or the meatballs sub or something. It's good food, inexpensive, in a family-style atmosphere. Another memorable dining experience would have to include the Bali High restaurant out on Shelter Island Drive, with a view back of downtown San Diego across the bay. Really, because when can you have enough tiki? It's a very kitschy restaurant, but it also happens to be a restaurant with some pretty good food. It's where my son decided he liked clam chowder. Good seafood out at the Bali High, and I would certainly recommend the poo-poo platter, just because everyone should order a poo-poo platter now and then. And that leads me to my favorite neighborhood in San Diego, and that's Old Town. And Old Town was something for both lovers of Mexican cuisine, Mexican culture, and history, because Old Town is itself a historic district. This is where San Diego started, and San Diego, being the southern of all of the cities within California, at least all of the older cities within California, is the first of the settlements into Spain, by Spain into California. And so this is the first non-native settlement within California, and so it's sometimes called the Jamestown of the Pacific. And so Old Town retains this Spanish charm that is the adobe buildings there and such, and it also has a lot of shops and outdoor cafes and bands playing if you go there at night. The one thing I would say is, if you're expecting to go to Old Town and just walk in and get a table at some of the restaurants, be prepared to wait for some time. In the evening, it gets to be a very popular place, and it might take you at least an hour to find a spot to sit out there under the stars and enjoy your margarita and your chips and whatever else you're going to order. But definitely someplace that's worth going, either for the history buff to go through the preserved buildings of the State Historic Park, or really for almost anyone else for that matter. So in my family, for instance, I'm a history buff, and my wife isn't, but we both really enjoyed it, even though the first time we went, as I mentioned, was when my wife was about 8 months pregnant, and had flunked her glucose tolerance test and was running high blood pressure, so she wasn't allowed to eat sugar, she wasn't allowed to drink, and she wasn't allowed to eat salt. And at a Mexican restaurant, that can be fairly limiting. But even so, it's just a beautiful place to sit out and enjoy the evening and eat at one of the restaurants. They do have the heaters out there if it gets cooler, but a lovely place to go. When we stayed that time, so many years back now, in San Diego, we stayed in another area very near Old Town. Slightly up the hill from Old Town is a set of Victorian buildings. And these are buildings that were moved there when they were going to be in the way of some of the freeway construction in San Diego. And so what they did, rather than tear these buildings down, they actually pick them up and move them to this location. And there's maybe a dozen of these buildings, and one of them is actually a bed and breakfast, or an inn, and that is the Heritage Park Inn this is Heritage Park, these set of Victorians. Another very lovely place, and I have fond memories of either sitting out on the porch in the morning sun eating our breakfast, or staying up in the turret room there and getting a view of Heritage Park and Old Town as we get ready to start the day as tourists. I'll put a link in the show notes to other neighborhoods to visit in San Diego. There are a number of other ones that I haven't been to, so I can't comment on, such as Balboa Park. Well, Balboa Park is where the zoo is. Horton Plaza, Fashion Valley, Adams Avenue, Hillcrest, North Park, the Boulevard, a number of other places. So we'll put that link in the show notes on amateurtraveler.com. I would also recommend that while you're in San Diego's harbor is just a lovely harbor, and it also home to a number of Navy ships, and so a cruise of San Diego Bay could be very interesting and enjoyable. So that's certainly something that I would recommend, and there are a number of cruise options available, including dinner and dancing cruises and all sorts of other things. The other thing we should say is that San Diego is also used by a lot of tourists as a gateway into Mexico, because you are very close to the Mexican border there. And so there are both guided tours of Tijuana and Rosarito Beach and Ensenada that leave from San Diego, as well as places to park your car and just simply walk over into Tijuana, into downtown Tijuana, and go to the Mexican wrestling there. That's always an interesting opportunity. Or watch the Greyhounds run, or just do some shopping, or enjoy some of the local food and local culture down there in our nearest neighbor, or our nearest neighbor to the south, at least. Well, looks like this show will end up just a little shorter than usual. I find that even with 1 week away from podcasting, I have gone out of my rhythm here. It's taken me actually longer to produce this show, even though it's shorter. So if you have any comments about things I've missed in San Diego, other ideas for what people should do when they go there, as well as other ideas for other upcoming shows, let me know. Comment on the discussion boards. I'll put a link in that in the show notes, or send me an email at host@amateurtraveler.com. I did have some other email and posts within the last couple weeks about the show. I did get a post from April Rain 416, which I can only hope is an alias, who is a college student who is saving up for traveling and is looking for resources for planning an inexpensive budget travel. So I'll put a link in the show notes to April's question about what resources people use for doing budget travel. I also had another nice note from Adidas Orange, back apparently from the first big backpacking trip in Europe, who writes to ask about High Sierra Yosemite camps. Does anyone have any experience with High Sierra Yosemite camps? So if there's anyone who has experience, please go post that on the discussion boards, or drop me an email and I can... No, I just post on the discussion boards. I don't have an email for Adidas Orange. So, but there is a nice intro from the same person who apparently found out about the show through the National Geographic Traveler. Also, welcome to all the people who heard about the show through the iTunes store, the iTunes Music store that featured the Amateur Traveler while I was gone. That's very nice. The Las Vegas edition seems to have been at least a popular topic, because I've had over 5,000 downloads already in the last 2 weeks on that show. I haven't got a lot of feedback, so let me know what you think of that show. Either post something in the discussion boards or drop me an email. I also got an email this morning from John Hammond, a musician of some renown that I met at one of the podcaster meetups in San Francisco, who sent me a video for the No Excess Luggage Blues. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I think you'll enjoy that little ditty. The 1-year anniversary of the Amateur Traveler comes up on July 9th. I will be celebrating that, as those of you who've been listening to the show know, by going to Tanzania. I leave on the 7th of July. I'm hoping to have 2 shows in the can and ready to go live, so that there won't be a gap in the shows, but we'll see if I manage to do that with everything else I'm trying to do for this trip. I have some plans for a show on Antarctica, and another one on Washington, D.C., so stay tuned and listen to that. To close out the show, I have a promo for the Podcasters Awards, so I'll play that for you now.
I'll give it. Want to know who decides what the best podcast is? You do. The 2006 Podcast Awards nominations are underway.
Here's all the details.
Go to podcastawards.com right now and nominate your favorite podcasts. Categories include technology, entertainment, sports, comedy, and more. Nominate and vote for your favorite podcasts. Plus, find new ones to subscribe to today at podcastawards.com. Brought to you by Podcast Connect Inc., the world's leading innovator in podcast marketing.
So if you enjoy the show and you're thinking about what you'd want to get me for the 1-year anniversary, how about a nomination to the Podcaster Awards, or maybe even a vote on Podcast Alley or Podcast Pickle or one of the other podcast sites. Thank you very much for listening. This episode was brought to you by HotelBook.com, which features many unique and independent hotels in Southern California and over 5,000 worldwide in more than 140 countries. Visit HotelBook.com to see the latest destination deals in Southern California with rates of up to 30% off. Whether it's a resort, a cabana, or a castle, HotelBook.com invites you to stay your way and stay independent.
The best and the brightest, served up daily by the sharpest minds in content delivery, Podshow and Limelight.